All right, guys, it's a beautiful sunny day in Colorado, and today we're making more progress on our turbo big block Silverado, and we're working on our quest to make a 9-second quarter-mile pass, which we are going to do this summer. Now, if you watched the last video, you'll recall that as part of the upgrades that we're doing to make the truck faster, we're doing basically a new top end on the engine, different cylinder heads, different intake manifold, larger throttle body, and of course, most importantly, a bigger turbocharger. But the only thing I'm waiting on right now, which is kind of put the brakes on this part of the project, is a set of head gaskets. It's not like an LS that you can find head gaskets on every corner, so we're getting some Cometic MLS gaskets made, but it's just a couple of weeks for that to happen. So anyway, the front part of the truck is at a standstill, but we have some work that we can do out back. We have a couple of easy things that we're going to be changing on the suspension to hopefully help put the power down a little bit better, get better traction, and launch better. So the very first thing that we are going to do is remove the bed from the truck, because it'll be a lot easier to do what we want to do. So let's get to it. Oh, we did get a comment about the brake rotors being on the wrong side. Now, I do understand that some rotors go some way, so some go another. And this probably is counterintuitive, but this is what the instructions said. This is the right-hand side, and they want the slots going that way. Is it right or wrong? I don't know. I just know what the instructions said. We did have a couple of questions about the suspension setup on the truck as it sits now, which we probably should address because it's going to change. It's a 4/6 drop right now. It has a 2-inch drop spindle. Technically it has the stock coils up front, but because we have a gazillion pound big block, that lowered it about 2 more inches. And out back, it's pretty simple. It's just a flip kit with the overload removed. And it does have Caltrax on it now. Need to wash those. A lot of people too don't like it when I start a lug nut like that, but as long as you're cautious, it's not going to do anything bad. And before you worry about them being torqued down, this is not permanent. They're going to come back off when we finish the engine. Now, I can't tell you how many times I've had the bed removed on this truck, but it's definitely worth it because it only takes a second and it gives you so much more room to work on. So there's like 8 bolts and a couple of electrical plugs right here. So all you gotta do is remove that guy, go into the frame, remove that guy, go into the bumper, and these two go to the taillights so they can stay. And then we'll just zap these 18s out and the bed will come up. Just got to undo the filler neck real quick, and then we're going to just lift the bed off using the lift. Go figure. Now James wanted to help, but I'm making him record, so we're going to do this one-handed. Tell me though when the bed's kind of in the middle of the lift. Is it centered about there?
Yeah, looks like yes sir, now.
Okay. That's perfect.
Do you try to hang it up?
Yeah, I got some big straps we're going to hang it.
Oh, okay. Now I got that.
And this one, we could just kind of do that. All right, so we have barely enough clearance, but I'm just gonna roll the truck out and the bed can stay right here. Part number on there. So the rear suspension on this truck, like I mentioned, is a 6-inch drop, which basically means it's a flip kit. The axle sits on top of the leaf springs compared to where it was from the factory. We C-notched it. We have cal tracks, which those guys are going to help increase traction, stop wheel hop. But there's two things that I'm going to be changing. So one, we're going to actually lift this truck just a little bit with these parts right here, and it's going to do two things. One, make it look a little bit nicer because it looks like it sits just a little bit too low in the back end to me. It's totally a personal preference thing. But the other thing it's going to do, because these are the Bellltech Lift Hangers. So we're going to cut the stock frame bracket off here, and these are going to bolt on more or less like that. And instead of the shackle being in tension, it's going to be flipped. The shackle will be in compression, and the bottom of the spring is going to be pushed down somewhere about here. Now that, because we have two different hole options, we can either lift the truck 1 inch or 2 inches from where it's at. I'm going to start with just 1 inch because I think that's where I want to be. But by changing the angle of that leaf spring, it's also going to improve the angle of the Caltrack bar, which this right here is kind of going downhill from back to front, where we want it to go uphill from back to front. So that's the short version of it. Let's see if that theory holds true. Oh, and if you want this shock kit that I have back here, Atomic Fabrication and Performance is the place to go. Sells the brackets, axle side and frame side, and he can sell you the shocks too. Taparuski with an actual mechanic's hammer, not a claw hammer. Love you, Matt. For the record, I do own a claw hammer, but only one of them.
Yes, sir.
Just like that. James, we didn't plan this out, did we?
It looks like very easy to come out.
Yeah. So when we're done, that's how the shackles are going to go, instead of like that. But for now, I just need them out of the way. All right, so I know I've shown you guys this trick a gazillion times between here and Truck Tech, but these frame rivets, this bracket is riveted on the frame in 3 places and there's 1 bolt. They're actually very simple to get off. Just put a couple slits in them. You can hit them with a chisel. I stole Chris's air hammer, which I'm going to use, but same thing. Simple.
What the?
All right, we got the old brackets cut off. We have the little bottom bracket reinforcement corner thing cut off. And now we're just working the end of this tube. It normally protrudes through the end. I had to cut the edges like that so it could fit over it. Now I kind of beveled this out, and I'm just going to put a little bead of weld in there just to kind of tie the tube to the frame, which is not super important because it's like boxed on the inside, boxed on the outside, but we just want to make this thing 1000%. Alrighty, it's the next day and all of the dirty work is done. And I really enjoy fabrication projects, but even more than that, I enjoy cleaning up and sweeping the floor after the work is done because I can't stand a mess. I love a clean shop. But anyway, this is kind of what we're left with. Obviously, we had to cut off the hanger bracket and the little 90-degree thing that came down from the bottom of the frame. And originally, the little cross member tube kind of looked like that. It poked through the frame by maybe 3/8 of an inch, but it did interfere with the new lift hanger. So I just had to kind of trim down the outside edge a little bit. I heavily beveled this out and then I re-welded it and cleaned it up just so it still has a full 360-degree weld holding everything together. Not that there's a ton of force and stress in the back of the frame, but I figured what the heck, we've come this far, we might as well do it right. Or that's the way I consider it to be right. Anyway, just a quick demonstration of how this shackle flip lift kit basically is gonna work. This is what the stock arrangement looks like. Hanger bolted onto the frame, shackle is in tension, the spring is gonna be pushing up. This is how the new one's gonna look. Basically, it flips the shackle upside down. A lot of Dodge trucks use this. Not that one's really any better than the other as far as I can tell, but we have two different options for the new Bellltech lift hangers. This is the highest suspension setting where the upper holes here line up, or we can slide it up a little bit further there. And this is the lower of the two choices. Now, this is advertised as a 1 or a 2-inch lift, but if you measure from the new point where the spring eye is going to be compared to the original point, it's actually about 2.5 inches lower. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to get 2.5 inches of lift because the spring is very long and the axle is approximately midway through. So if we push the spring 2.5 inches down, it's only going to be lifting the axle or the suspension height by about 1.25 inches, which is kind of what I want, or that's exactly what I want. Now, I did for a very long time consider doing some customization here because I cannot take a part out of a box without modifying it in some way. It just, I don't know what it is, but I was thinking I wanted to have it instead of right there, just a teeny tiny bit higher, but not quite there. So I was gonna just grind the paint off, weld the hole shut and put my own in there. But looking at it, taking the measurements, this 1.25 inch setting is gonna be perfect, I believe. So we'll get those bolted onto the frame, get the bed back on the truck, and get our shop space back. So the rear of the truck is pretty much back together, and weirdly enough, I was just kind of thinking about this. This is kind of like the more pedestrian version of the suspension that I'm gonna be running on the 4-wheel drive drag truck. That uses a Calvert split monoleaf instead of a factory OEM leaf spring, and it uses a Funkhauser slider instead of a shackle flip like we're doing here. But the geometry is pretty much the same exact thing. Like on the spring slider, the rear of the leaf spring sits pretty much right here. And so this obviously is much less expensive because you have free factory leaf springs. I think these were like 100, 150 bucks or so. And you know, the front stock, just the flip kit and the CalTrack there. So by lowering the rear end of the leaf spring, you can kind of look at it, it's a little bit more level front to back. But the most important thing is down here on the CalTrack bar, it's now going level or slightly uphill, where before it was slightly downhill. So that's gonna help plant the tire a little bit better, and it's gonna make it look better because it's slightly higher. So let's take the truck, slide it back that way. We'll take the bed and put it back down, and then we will actually have some space to walk around the shop now. Or then, not now, because it's still up in the air.
Last time looks like this, but right now it looks very good balance.
So we got the bed bolted back down. I am loving the stance. I'm also loving the fact that now I can get it on the lift without having to jack it up from the back, which I had to do before. So that's great. And I think that's just about perfect. It'll also, side note, it'll also go up on my trailer a little bit easier because it kind of would rub in the middle because the truck was so low. But, oh, and the other good side effect is now I'll be able to run a slightly taller drag tire. We've got a 15 by 10 weld setup that we run on the back when we go to the track. Typically I've had a 275/60 on there, but I think this year I may switch to either a 315 or something like a 28/10/50. Maybe we'll go full slick. Not sure yet, but now that the back end is slightly higher, we'll have a little bit more room for that. I did just get notification that our head gaskets are they're on the way. They'll be here at the end of this week. So next week we can start reassembly on that, I think. And then the only other thing I was doing is just a little prep work on the intake. I mentioned last time I was considering running my Raylar Gen 7R intake on this combination. It was a toss up because this is a modified intake that works okay. And this was supposed to go on my 4-wheel drive drag truck, but I'm just going to buy a second one of these. And that way each truck will have, I guess, basically the same top end. We'll have the aluminum heads and the aluminum intake. Of course, the other truck is going to be twin turboed and it's a bigger cubic inch. It's a built motor and it's going to be like 17 or 1800 horsepower, where this one is maybe going to be 1,000. We'll see. But anyway, just getting the things like the fuel rails mocked up. We're getting the throttle body mocked up. Shout out to the guys at Holley, by the way. They make some really good stuff. These throttle bodies are great to tune. I've got one on the S10 right now and it works perfect. So also need to buy another one of those for the drag truck. But anyway, the only modification I'm going to make right now is just to weld like a little tab on this area right here. The 8.1s that this intake manifold is designed for, of course, they come with a drive-by wire throttle body. And because this is an engine swap in a half-ton older Silverado, it has a drive-by cable operating system in the computer. So I'm just going to build a little bracket so I can hold my throttle cable, cable where it needs to be. So we'll get that knocked out real quick. By the way, Girl Scout cookie season, loving the Thin Mints. Thank you. Thanks to the wife for bringing those by. So let's get to do some cutting and welding, and then as soon as the parts show up, we'll put this thing back together. All right, so I messed around a little bit, and this is what I came up with. It's gonna sort of fit right in here on the same plane as the boss for the fuel rail hold down. So the first part of it, I'm just gonna build from 1/4 inch aluminum, and we'll weld it directly to the intake. This little cardboard, I think you can buy it from like arts and craft stores, but typically it just comes from like cereal boxes, the stuff that like a 12-pack of soda comes in. It's just good, I don't know, chipboard. Great for templates. This one came from a gingerbread house kit forever ago. All right, today's tool wish list includes a bandsaw. But one thing to know, you should never let your tools limit you, because this is like a $5 or $10 Walmart hacksaw, and it works great. There's a photo I'm going to try to find and put on the screen for you guys. I'm pretty sure I have it at the house, but it was me when I was like, I don't know, 10, 12 years old, doing this exact same thing at the garage of the house. I'm going to try to find that and put it on the screen. Brings back memories. All right, so this is where the piece is gonna go, but to hold it while I weld it, I'm just taking this, I'm gonna clamp it to that little boss right there, and then clamp this kind of underneath. That way these are both in the same plane, so when I build the throttle cable bracket, it's pretty simple to attach. This is about the right height anyway for the throttle cable. All right, so the first part is done. We have the little tab welded on the manifold. We get the oil fill tab welded onto the pipe, so that's good and solid now. And then I started the template for the bracket. This is gonna hold the throttle cable. It's gonna go in that hole there and share the fuel rail mount. And I'm gonna have a second hole in here. Normally, I do have to run a 1/4 inch spacer on top of these because the injectors are taller than stock. And so on this one, I'm just gonna eliminate the spacer and make this out a 1/4 inch, which is probably, well, not probably, it's definitely thicker than it needs to be, but what the heck, we'll simplify things and eliminate rather than just stacking 2 spacers together. Basically what we're gonna do is I'm gonna cut this old bracket that I had, and it's gonna be welded more or less in that kind of area. But first we'll start by making that out of that. You guys ever seen those pictures of like the first caveman drawings ever found? They're in like France or something. That's about how my freehand plasma cutting looks. So just a short while later, we've got the intake prepped and pretty much ready to go. We got a couple of, like plug in the brake booster port there because we got hydro boost, block that guy off, the nipple in there for the fuel pressure regulator and stuff. And pretty much everything I did up here was just because we're running a drive-by cable throttle body instead of a drive-by wire. Like every 8.1 from the factory had a drive-by wire or an electric throttle body. So that's why there was no spot to mount the throttle cable on this one, but just a super simple little tab and bracket setup that we got welded on here, and we are good to go. Definitely check out Raylar if you need any performance parts for your 8.1. We've got their heads, we've got their intake, and they make stroker kits, they make valve train cams, pretty much you name it. And like we've discovered, the 8.1 is a pretty fun and unique combination. It has, in my opinion, my humble opinion, has a pretty good high performance potential. Side by side, this is kind of my favorite shot just to see the difference between the two, because this was designed for industrial use, for towing, for boats, for generators, for making tons of torque at low engine speed. That's why it's got a relatively small 78mm throttle body and a really, really long runner. It makes tons of torque. This one, on the other hand, we've got a 90mm throttle body. We've got a bigger plenum volume. We've got a slightly shorter runner, which will help raise our operating range of the engine, and it's just gonna help it breathe better. This is, you could think of it more like an LS2 intake for your 8.1 rather than just a industrial generator intake manifold. So anyway, yeah, that's kind of what it took. Oh, the only other thing I was going to mention though is this guy right here. This is the map sensor mount. I just made this little tab that covers the entire map sensor because somebody told me that these early Gen 3 3-bar map sensors can blow apart, which we don't want to have happen. And the reason I did that is because this is the factory hold down. It's just a bolt with like a huge washer, and it just barely covered the edge of the map sensor. So this covers the entire thing and hopefully will prevent any sort of failure of the sensor. But yeah, like I said, this thing is ready to go. And luckily today we just received our new head gaskets from Comedic. So that means next week we're going to start putting this thing back together with new heads, new intake, and the bigger turbo. I showed you guys all those other parts last time, but I'm really excited. This thing, I believe, will make 1,000 horsepower on a stock bottom end. Which, by the way, speaking of stock bottom end, I mentioned it in the last video a couple times. You guys were worried about the rings, gapping the rings. And I actually already did that. It was some time ago now, about 2 summers ago. We had this engine out of the truck and we resealed it, new gaskets everywhere. We gapped the rings, so that's been taken care of. And we put in fresh bearings and seals and things like that, new timing set. And does have a performance camshaft, but stock block, stock piston, stock rod, just with gapped rings and a slightly bigger camshaft. So 1,000 horsepower, here we come. before you know it, we're gonna be doing burnouts in this thing and having a blast. So thank you guys for watching. Come back soon.